Welcome to my channel. What would you do if a happy family trip suddenly became a fight against a storm, a dangerous river, and time itself? What if one small decision could save someone's life, while another careless choice could put everyone in danger? Today, you will follow a family whose simple weekend adventure becomes a powerful lesson about courage, love, patience, and hope. The Carter family lived in a peaceful town near Pine Valley. Daniel, the father, loved taking his family outdoors. Maria, his wife, always prepared enough food for everyone. Their three children, Sophie, Ben, and Mia, had very different personalities. Sophie was careful and thoughtful. Ben was full of energy and loved excitement. Mia was the youngest, curious about everything she saw. Their playful dog, Charlie, was always ready to join them. One Saturday morning, the family planned a walk through Pine Valley. They packed sandwiches, fruit, water, jackets, a first aid kit, and a flashlight. Everyone was excited. Daniel checked the weather before leaving and noticed that rain might arrive later. He suggested returning early. Ben wanted a longer adventure, but Daniel explained that a smart adventure always begins with safety. The family agreed and drove toward the forest. The first turning point came before they even started walking. At the trail entrance, Daniel noticed a warning sign about changing weather. Instead of ignoring it, he took a picture of the sign and checked the map again. He told everyone that if the sky became dark, they would turn back immediately. The children agreed, although Ben secretly hoped for something exciting. Soon, they entered the forest. Sunlight moved between the tall trees, birds sang above them, and a cool breeze touched their faces. Sophie walked beside Mia, while Ben moved ahead with Charlie. Maria pointed out flowers and small animals, making the walk both fun and educational. For a while, everything felt perfect. Then Ben noticed something unusual. The second turning point came when he saw a narrow path leading away from the main trail. Fresh footprints appeared in the soft ground. Ben wanted to follow them, believing they might lead to an exciting place. Daniel stopped him. He explained that unknown paths could be unsafe, especially when bad weather was coming. Ben looked disappointed, but he stayed with the family. A few minutes later, Sophie noticed that one trail marker looked different. She asked Daniel to check the map. The third turning point arrived when Daniel realized they had taken a wrong turn. They were not deeply lost, but they were farther from the main path than he expected. Instead of blaming anyone, Daniel told everyone to remain calm. They stopped, studied the map, and slowly walked back. Sophie felt proud that she had spoken up. Daniel told her that noticing small details could prevent big problems. The family returned to the correct trail and continued walking. Then the sky suddenly changed. Dark clouds covered the sunlight, and distant thunder rolled across the valley. Maria looked worried. Daniel checked his watch and told everyone it was time to return. The fourth turning point came when heavy rain began falling earlier than expected. Ben wanted to run, but Daniel told everyone to stay close. They put on their jackets and moved carefully. Within minutes, the rain became stronger. Wind shook the trees, and water rushed across the trail. Mia became frightened. Sophie held her hand and said, "Stay with me. We will get through this." Then, lightning flashed above the trees. Daniel searched for safer ground. Suddenly, Charlie stopped and pulled toward a bush. Everyone followed him. Beneath the wet leaves, they discovered an old emergency box attached to a wooden post. The fifth turning point came when Daniel opened it and found a flashlight, basic supplies, and an old map showing a nearby shelter. He felt relieved. The family finally had a clear direction. Daniel looked at everyone and said, "We stay together, we stay calm, and we take one safe step at a time." They followed the new route through the rain, unaware that the next part of their journey would test them even more. As they moved deeper into the forest, the sound of rain grew louder behind them. Ben held the flashlight tightly, determined to help. Maria kept counting the children, while Sophie watched every step. Mia stayed close to Charlie. Nobody knew what waited ahead. The shelter was still somewhere beyond the trees, and the storm was getting stronger. Daniel looked at his family and felt a quiet fear inside him. He knew they had to make every choice carefully now. One mistake could change their entire day. Yet, he also knew something important. They were together, and together they could face whatever came next. Their greatest test had not begun. The family followed the hidden trail through the wet forest, moving slowly while the rain fell around them. Daniel kept the old map inside his jacket, protecting it from the water. Maria stayed beside Mia, while Sophie watched the ground for slippery stones and tree roots. Ben carried the flashlight from the emergency box and felt proud that he could finally help. Charlie walked between them, stopping whenever he heard a strange sound. The sixth turning point came when they reached a small stream. On a normal day, the water would have been easy to cross, but the storm had changed everything. The stream had become wide and fast, and brown water rushed between the rocks. Ben looked across and said, "I can jump over it." Daniel quickly stopped him. "No, the water is too strong." Ben wanted to prove that he was brave, but he remembered the lesson about making safe choices. Daniel searched along the bank and found a narrower place farther upstream. He tested the stones one by one before crossing. Maria followed carefully, then Sophie helped Mia. Ben waited until everyone was safe before moving. When he reached the last stone, his foot slipped. Daniel grabbed his arm and pulled him onto the bank. Ben looked down at the rushing water and became quiet. He finally understood that being brave did not mean taking unnecessary risks. Sometimes the strongest person is the one who knows when to stop. The family continued toward the shelter, but after a few minutes, they heard something strange. It sounded like someone crying. Everyone stopped. They listened again. The sound came from behind a group of trees. The seventh turning point came when Daniel decided to investigate instead of ignoring the voice. He told Maria to keep the children together while he carefully moved toward the sound. Sophie insisted on coming because she wanted to help. Daniel agreed, but told her to stay close. Behind the trees, they discovered a young boy sitting near a fallen branch. He looked cold, frightened, and completely alone. His name was Noah. He explained that he had been walking with his uncle when the storm became stronger. They had become separated, and Noah had been searching for a safe place. Maria immediately gave him water and some food. Sophie covered him with her jacket. Ben pointed the flashlight around the area, looking for signs of the missing man. Mia sat beside Noah and said softly, "You are safe with us now." Noah looked at her and smiled for the first time. The eighth turning point came when Noah remembered something important. His uncle had been carrying a bright orange backpack. Before they became separated, his uncle had told him to stay near the main trail and wait for help. Daniel looked at the map again. The main trail was not far away, but the rising water made the lower path dangerous. Daniel decided that the safest plan was to take Noah to the shelter first. From there, they could use the emergency radio to contact rescuers. Everyone agreed. They began walking again, now moving as one group. Noah stayed between Maria and Sophie. Ben carried the flashlight. Mia held Charlie's leash. Daniel led the way. After some time, the rain became lighter, and they finally saw the small wooden shelter ahead. The ninth turning point came when they reached the shelter and discovered that it was still dry and strong. Everyone stepped inside and finally relaxed. Mia sat on a bench and hugged Charlie. Ben looked at his muddy shoes and laughed. "My shoes look like 2 buckets of mud," he said. Everyone laughed, even Noah. For a moment, the frightening forest felt less dangerous. Daniel found blankets and a first aid box inside the shelter. Then he noticed an emergency radio attached to the wall. He turned it on, but only static came through. He tried again. Nothing happened. Daniel checked the radio carefully. The 10th turning point came when Sophie remembered that the flashlight had spare batteries. She quickly gave them to Daniel. He replaced the batteries in the radio and tried once more. This time, a weak voice answered. "Forest shelter, please respond." Everyone became silent. Daniel explained that they had found a lost boy and needed help. The ranger told him that rescue workers were already searching the forest. However, the storm had damaged part of the road, so reaching the shelter would take time. The ranger told them to remain inside and stay together. Noah finally relaxed. He knew his uncle and rescuers were looking for him. Maria gave everyone some food, but Daniel noticed that their water supply was getting low. Ben suggested collecting rainwater in empty bottles. Daniel agreed. Soon, everyone had a small job. Sophie organized the first aid supplies. Maria helped Noah rest. Ben collected clean rainwater. Mia stayed with Charlie. The family had become a team without anyone needing to give orders. Outside, the storm continued. Then Daniel looked through the doorway and noticed something worrying. Water was beginning to flow around the shelter. The 11th turning point came when he realized that the shelter might not remain safe if the water continued rising. He checked the map and saw higher ground nearby. The problem was that reaching the hill meant leaving the shelter and walking through the rain again. Maria looked at the children. Everyone was tired. Noah was exhausted. Ben's clothes were soaked. Mia looked frightened. Daniel knew they had a difficult decision to make. He gathered everyone and spoke calmly. "We cannot control the weather," he said, "but we can control our next decision. We can stay here and hope the water stops, or we can move toward higher ground before the path becomes dangerous." Nobody wanted to leave the shelter. It felt like the safest place they had found all day. But everyone understood Daniel's concern. Sophie took Mia's hand. Ben picked up the emergency bag. Maria helped Noah stand. Charlie moved close to Mia. Daniel opened the door and looked toward the hill. The rain was still falling, but the path was visible. He took a deep breath. "Stay close," he said. "Nobody walks alone." The family stepped back into the storm, carrying only what they truly needed. They were tired, cold, and afraid, but something inside them had changed. They were no longer simply trying to finish a family adventure. They were protecting one another, and that gave them the courage to continue. As they began climbing toward the higher ground, Daniel looked at the dark forest behind them. He wondered what would happen next. The hill was steep, the ground was slippery, and the storm had not completely passed. But the family kept moving, one careful step at a time. They did not know it yet, but the most important moment of their journey was still waiting for them at the top. The family climbed toward the hill in the rain. Daniel walked first, testing the muddy ground before each step. Maria stayed beside Noah, and Sophie held Mia's hand tightly. Ben carried the emergency bag, while Charlie followed close behind. The 12th turning point came when Ben suddenly slipped. His foot slid across the wet ground, and his body moved toward the edge of the slope. Daniel grabbed his arm just in time. Sophie caught Ben's jacket, and Maria pulled Sophie backward. Everyone froze. Ben looked down and saw how far the ground dropped below him. Daniel pulled him to a safe place and held his shoulder. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Ben shook his head. "I was trying to help," he said quietly. Daniel smiled. Helping does not mean rushing. Sometimes helping means slowing down and thinking. Ben took a deep breath. He understood that courage was not about acting without fear. Courage was about making the right choice even when fear was present. The family continued climbing, but now every person moved with greater care. At last, they reached the top of the hill. An old stone shelter stood there, protected from the strongest wind. Everyone entered and sat down. Noah looked outside, hoping to see his uncle. Daniel stepped near the doorway and called his name. No answer came. He called again. Then, through the sound of the rain, they heard a whistle. Daniel stopped and listened. The whistle came again, followed by a distant voice. The 13th turning point came when a man appeared between the trees. It was Noah's uncle. He had searched for the boy since they separated. When he saw Noah, he ran forward and hugged him tightly. Noah began crying with relief. His uncle thanked the family again and again. Maria told him that she would hope another family would do the same if one of her children were lost. Daniel contacted the rescue team through the radio and explained that everyone was safe. Soon, rescuers reached the hill. They checked each person and gave them warm blankets. Nobody had serious injuries. The rescue leader looked at Daniel and said, "You made many good choices today." Daniel shook his head. "We all did," he answered. Everyone helped when it mattered. The 14th turning point came when the rescue leader explained what had happened below. The lower trail had flooded, and the river was still rising. If the family had crossed that river or stayed near the lower shelter, they could have been trapped. Daniel looked at his children and remembered their small decisions. Turning away from the unknown path had mattered. Returning after noticing the wrong marker had mattered. Refusing to cross the dangerous water had mattered. Helping Noah had mattered. Fixing the radio had mattered. Leaving the shelter before the water became too high had mattered. None of those choices had seemed powerful alone, but together they had brought everyone to safety. The family began walking down the hill with the rescue team. The clouds opened, and sunlight appeared across the wet trees. Ben looked back at the forest and smiled. "This morning, I wanted a big adventure," he said. "Now, I just want to go home." Everyone laughed. Even Noah smiled for the first time that day together. Before they reached the road, he turned toward the family. "I will never forget you," he said. Mia hugged him and replied, "We will never forget you either." Finally, they reached their car. The 15th turning point came when Daniel opened the doors and realized something important. The family had started the morning believing the goal was to reach the hilltop. Now he understood that the real goal had never been the view. It had been learning how to care for one another when the path became difficult. They drove home quietly. At home, Maria prepared warm soup. Everyone changed into dry clothes, and Charlie slept beside the heater. Later, they placed the muddy map on the table. Sophie cleaned it, but some marks would not disappear. Daniel decided to keep it exactly as it was. "This map is damaged," Ben said. "Yes," Daniel replied, "but it tells a beautiful story." That evening, the family sat together and remembered everything that had happened. They laughed about muddy shoes and Charlie's discovery. They talked about Noah and the moment his uncle arrived. Then Daniel said, "Life will bring storms too. Some will be loud and others will be quiet. We cannot stop every storm, but we can choose how we face it." Sophie asked, "What should we do when life becomes hard?" Daniel smiled. "Stop, breathe, think, take the next right step, and never face everything alone." The children remembered those words. Their journey was almost over, but its greatest lesson was only beginning. The next morning, sunlight filled the Carter family home. The storm was gone, but nobody had forgotten the forest. Daniel placed the muddy map on the kitchen table while Maria prepared breakfast. Sophie helped set the plates. Ben checked the flashlight, Mia brushed Charlie, and nobody seemed in a hurry. Sophie said she had learned that speaking up could prevent danger. Ben admitted that he had learned something even bigger. He once thought being brave meant moving fast and never asking for help. Now he understood that real courage meant knowing when to stop. Mia said she had learned that a frightened person sometimes needs only one kind voice nearby. Maria smiled and said she had learned never to take family time for granted. Daniel listened carefully. He realized that the storm had changed more than their plans. It had changed the way they looked at life. A few weeks later, their daily routine returned. The children went to school, Maria continued her work, and Daniel returned to his office. Yet, the family carried the forest lesson into everything they did. Sophie became more confident about sharing her ideas. One afternoon, she had to give a presentation at school. She felt nervous and wanted to stay home, but Daniel reminded her of the storm. "You did not know what would happen in the forest," he said. "You simply took the next safe step." Sophie remembered his words. She stood before her class, spoke with a shaking voice, and finished her presentation. When she returned home, she smiled proudly. She had discovered that courage did not require the absence of fear. Ben faced his own challenge. During a school game, he made a mistake that cost his team an important point. He felt angry and wanted to blame someone else. Then he remembered the muddy hill. He took a breath, apologized, and encouraged his teammate. His coach noticed his change and told him that character was more important than one mistake. Mia also carried the lesson forward. One day, she noticed a new student sitting alone during lunch. The girl looked nervous and unsure. Mia remembered Noah sitting alone beneath the tree. She walked over and invited the girl to join her. That small invitation became the beginning of a friendship. Maria watched her children changing and felt proud. She understood that difficult experiences can become valuable when people choose to learn from them. Daniel placed the old trail map inside a frame and hung it on the living room wall. Visitors sometimes asked why he kept such a damaged map. Daniel would smile and explain that it reminded him of the day his family discovered their strength. One evening, the family sat outside as the sun disappeared behind the trees. Charlie rested near their feet. Daniel looked at everyone and said, "We thought the forest was testing us, but perhaps it was teaching us." Maria held his hand. Sophie looked toward the sky, Ben smiled, and Mia leaned against her mother. They all understood. Life would bring more storms. Some would be loud, while others would arrive quietly. There would be failures, broken plans, difficult choices, lost opportunities, and moments when the future seemed uncertain. But the family now knew what to do. When life becomes confusing, stop and breathe. When fear becomes loud, listen carefully. When someone needs help, offer your hand. When you make a mistake, learn from it instead of giving up. When the road becomes difficult, remember that one small step is still progress. The Carter family also learned that success is not always reaching the place you plan to reach. Sometimes success means protecting the people you love. Sometimes it means changing direction. Sometimes it means admitting that you need help. And sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to quit. Months later, the family returned to Pine Valley on a sunny day. The river was calm, the trail was dry, and birds sang above them. They stopped near the place where their adventure had changed everything. Ben looked at the hill and smiled. Sophie pointed toward the trail marker. Mia held Charlie's leash. Daniel looked at his family and felt grateful. He knew they would face difficult days again, but they would face them differently now. They would remember the storm, the fear, the lost boy, and every careful choice. Most importantly, they would remember that they were never alone. And that became the greatest lesson of all. You may not control the storm, but you can control your next step. You may not know what waits beyond the trees, but you can keep hope alive. You may feel afraid, but you can still choose courage. And when life becomes hard, remember the Carter family. Stay together, keep moving, help others, and believe that brighter skies are always possible.